And thank you, Nina. Thank you for your kind and gracious words. And thank
Morning,
you all.
everybody.
Thank you all for coming. We know that there's a lot of confusion in the room change right now from the main ballroom to here. So most of the people don't know we're here right now. But anyway, for those of you who do, welcome, and we're glad to have you. So, yesterday we took a look at what are the behaviors that build trust, the three dimensions of trust: trust of character, we do what we say we're going to do, and it sets the tone and the direction of leadership; trust of communication, we openly and honestly communicate with one another; and trust of capability, we're leveraging the skills and abilities of each other. And of course, yesterday, we also took a look at each of the 16 behaviors that build each of these three dimensions. And so these are the behaviors that build trust. But today, we want to really focus on how trust is broken. And often, it's not the big things, as you know. It's those little things.
And it's an important perspective for us to be aware of, because when these behaviors that build the three dimensions of trust are practiced consistently, trust becomes stronger and stronger. But when those behaviors are practiced inconsistently or are not practiced, trust becomes vulnerable and can break down. And a core truth that we want to be able to provide to you is that in all relationships, trust will be built and trust will be broken. There are times when we all have been hurt, disappointed, or let down by another person. Does that resonate with you?
Yes.
It's life, isn't it? And there are times when we sit and have an honest moment with ourselves, we can also see that there are times when others have been hurt or disappointed or let down by us. None of us intends to breach trust. Over 90% of the breaches are intentional. So for us to have sustainable trust in our workplace relationships and our lifetime relationships, Dennis and I in September are celebrating 25 years of marriage. And so you can trust me when I say,
This is not easy.
Work.
It is not easy.
And when you research trust and write about trust and teach trust, you have to live
trust. And let me tell you, it ain't easy.
So we do need to understand all angles and all perspectives of trust, because it is the most precious commodity in our relationships that connects us all through our hearts and our souls.
So we'd like to hear from you. What are the experiences that actually break trust? And we want you to turn to your neighbor and chat with them for a few minutes on what are those experiences that actually break trust. What are those behaviors and those experiences? Please begin, and then we'll like to hear from each and every one of you.
So behaviors that you've experienced, and you can draw upon relationships with people in your personal life as well as relationships with people in your professional life, because relationships are all throughout our lives. So we'd love to hear a few examples. What are some experiences that you've had, examples of behaviors that you have experienced from others that have caused trust to break down?
Who'd like to go
first? Who has an example to share?
Sure, David.
Well, in personal life, when your children, especially when they're teenagers, do things that you ask them not to do,
Yes.
and they do them
Anyway.
subconsciously or on purpose,
Yeah.
to just see your reaction. It could be something you remember 40 years later. So yes, it's usually when you made a promise about something,
Yeah.
like with your kids, or your kids made a promise to you, and then they do the opposite, and you find out about it, and they didn't think you would, that becomes an issue.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Everybody
great.
relate to this?
Thank you. And let's acknowledge David for being the
Thank
first
you.
one. Okay, who else? What are some of the, yes?
Hi. I actually come from, this experience is more from professional background. I guess this happens a lot in organizations where you are actually talking about a person behind that person's back, when you have comments being made and you're not aware of it. I think that really breaks the trust factor, because I think in an organization it's about collaboration, and then when there's no trust, then you are actually not able to work, because you no longer have faith that that person can actually speak to you on your face. But I think this speaking on the person's back is something that I've experienced a lot. I mean, not that it has always happened to me, but I've seen it happening to people, and then I see how it really breaks people.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's unexpected. You don't really expect those people to talk, but
Yeah. And it's interesting, even though it may not be coming directly at you when you are observing it, you still do feel that. And we still do it does have an impact on us. Yes, here and then here. Yes, please.
I think especially in today's context where we have teams who are scattered across geographies, and when you're still part of one team, but you're scattered across, there's little difficulty in, getting your message across, what your intention is, and thereby you tend to break trust. And that's solely because you're not face to face. You're so far apart, and you've not been successful in conveying what you really wanted to convey, and thereby, the trust gets broken.
Unintentionally is the key thing that I heard you say, unintentionally. And when there's that distance, we have to work a little bit harder, don't we? It becomes a little more challenging. And I saw a hand, was it back here?
Good morning, my name is Yogesh. One thing which I experienced is the prejudices about the person. So before interacting, the first conversation, if I have some prejudices about the next person, then automatically it guides me in another direction. Instead of taking him as a human being, I consider his image into another view. Second thing is some inputs which comes from the third resources, from my team or from my colleagues, then that also leads to me that how I'm looking at the person altogether.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Subramanian?
Yeah, my name is Subramanian, and I have 2 points here. One on the trust-breaking behavior. I kind of resonate with the word congruence. So when you're congruent, what you say and the way you behave and your body language are all aligned with what is happening in that moment. And the moment you see that there is an incongruence, then you start suspecting whether the intentions were right, or was he trying to say what he meant to say. So unconsciously of that many times, or most of the time, but then in corporate situations, we try to tend to read that far more. And I'm almost leading to my second point, which is more an observation and a reflection point, is why is it that we behave differently at home and in corporate? Why are we so two different people when it comes to, so as soon as we walk through the corporate door, we turn into something, and that's my personal observation, and I'm not saying necessarily everybody's in that space, but why do we feel that different? And that's the point I want to kind of leave and have us reflect on the point. And then somewhere I'm suspecting it's the trust that is in play.
So thank you, Subramanian, and wonderful points. It never feels good to have people make assumptions about us, or to take other experiences and lay them over us. We all need and want that opportunity to be seen and heard and understood for who we are, don't we? Just get to know me, who I am. We all want that opportunity. And as Subramanian is saying, that congruence, it's very difficult to have trust when we say one thing and we do another thing. And there's that inconsistency. And why do we struggle at times to be true to who we are? In one place, but yet we show up differently in another place. Why might that be, And how does that cause trust to begin to be compromised? So these are all, wonderful examples about the ways in which trust can be made vulnerable. And it's important for us to be aware of these and to understand these because it helps us to be more tuned into our own behavior. Because I love this point of view in the honesty with the self, that there are times unintentionally we may compromise trust. We may show up in a certain way that is not what we intend to or is not true to who we are, but nevertheless, this is what happens. So Dennis and I would like to introduce you to a construct of trust. And as we've been exploring here, trust can be broken very subtly. It can erode gradually over time, yet the impact can be significant. So let's take a look at what causes trust to break down. We have a framework that we call betrayal. And for trust to be sustainable over time, it is as important that we understand trust as we understand betrayal. Because if we do not, the risk is we can allow betrayal to eat away at trust. And none of us wants that to happen in our lives. Would that be true? So we have here, this figure, this model illustrates the various ways in which trust can break down.
So we have from minor to major, intentional and unintentional. When it's unintentional, it's a byproduct of a self-serving act that causes hurt or harm to another. But intentional is the direct result of an action, a self-serving action that causes hurt and harm. And we give you some examples here, not to pigeonhole these, but just to give you, if you will, some handles, just to begin to understand the nature of betrayal. So you have, for example, repeatedly arriving late to work or not keeping agreements. Well, those can be minor, but they also can be major. It depends upon the intent and the impact. Let me say that again. It depends upon the intent and the impact on people, those around us who are affected by our actions. Are they at risk? How many times have you had a project where you're counting on somebody to deliver as promised their piece and they don't come through, and then that puts you in a pickle, or that puts you in a tough situation, particularly at the last minute?
Or a reputation that may be tarnished because somebody was gossiping about another person. Or a promotional opportunity that was robbed because somebody else took credit for someone's work. Or the late nights and the long weekends because people didn't deliver as promised. So the primary purpose here that Dennis and I are providing to you is there are big things that cause trust to break down, and there are small things that cause trust to break down. In our workplaces today, over 90% of the behaviors that cause trust to break down are small, subtle, minor, that build up over time. They have an accumulative impact. And what, from your experience, is that impact? When we are on the receiving end of those accumulative, unintentional breaches of trust, what impact does that have on you and others? What would you say?
We'd like to share. Yes.
I'm Malti from Tata Business Services. And when you say this minor, definitely, probably what will happen over the period, whoever, it can be repeatedly arriving late or not keeping with the project timeline when they are intentionally not doing it. But if it is repeated, the behavior of the other person gets changed.
Yes.
Right? Obviously, that will lead to either conflict or probably the trust what you can give it in future will start diminishing.
Yes. It actually erodes over time, and to the point where they can almost guarantee that you won't come through as promised, rather than coming through. And so they calibrate their behavior, then you calibrate, and it goes back, and it's a downward spiral. And that's a key piece here that is important, because trust begets trust, but betrayal begets betrayal as well. Thank you so much. Others, what are some of the other impacts of broken trust? Yes.
It impacts credibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Credibility.
Then, probably, then you'll have to go back and start from the beginning.
Oh, yes.
And that's the toughest part.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. When you
So-
have to rebuild it. It's not impossible, but it definitely is a harder road. Yes. Much more effort. Absolutely. Much
You
more
know, when
effort.
trust is present, things are simple and easy, they flow. Everybody is at their best. When trust is vulnerable, everything takes longer, everything is harder, and the lowest common denominator becomes the norm. And when we think today, what do our organizations need? People to take risks, to be bold, to collaborate, to break down silos. How can we do that when we're working in that environment of the breach of trust?
Right. And when there's broken trust, people pull
me.
back and they finger point and blame rather than step into it and problem solve together. They step back and generally abdicate responsibility rather than take responsibility.
So because trust is innately vulnerable and we all have our experiences of the breach, we need a solution. When trust is vulnerable and we have been hurt, we need a solution. Often when we're on the receiving end of the breach of trust, we may feel helpless and we may feel hopeless. We may feel as though we have no control. What Dennis and I would like to offer is that it does provide us with a choice point. We may choose to remain locked into the hurt, the disappointment, and perhaps even the anger around what has been done to us. And we may actually assume a posture that we call being a victim. Does that sound familiar to you? Do any of you have people who are in that victim mode in your workplace today? I know we work with many organizations that have this. Or we can choose to take that pain and that hurt and that disappointment. We can choose to take it and honor it. And the way we honor it is we step into it and we work through it. And that is the pathway of healing. We'd like to introduce you to a framework that helps us to heal and to renew trust, to rebuild trust, to help us learn to trust again and strengthen it over the course of time.
So the first step is observe and acknowledge what has happened. Anytime there's a breach of trust, an erosion of trust, a breakdown of trust, or even a major change, because this model here is also very appropriate for managing and going through, navigating change. The first step is to observe and acknowledge what has happened. And often, people experience the breach of trust or even major changes as a loss. The loss of what was, the loss of what could be, the loss of a dream. And that loss needs to be acknowledged. So it's important to check in with people and tune in to see what they're feeling, what they're sensing, what they're experiencing. So this first step is observe and acknowledge. What needs to be understood, what needs to be acknowledged, and that's a key piece to this process. The second, would you like to say something?
No, I'm good.
The second one is allow feelings to surface. Helping people to give voice to that which they're concerned about, that which keeps them up at night. Their issues, their concerns, their anxieties. All of those need to have safe, constructive forums from which people can talk about those issues that they're concerned about so that they can then begin the healing process. When they are not allowed to talk about the concerns, the issues, the challenges that they are facing, they don't go away by themselves. They go underground. And that's why the gossip and the backbiting and the rumor mill is alive and well in many organizations, is because people just get stuck right there in those two steps. And what is absolutely critical to moving on, and if you notice, the arrow goes down first because we're literally plummeting into the pain of the betrayal or the pain of the change. What's absolutely critical is the support, to give and or get support. And this is the number one issue with often leaders make, is they don't give themselves or each other enough support, or the organization enough support, their teams or their organizations, enough support to move through the change or move through the breach of trust. Support is absolutely critical to be able to shift from blame to problem solving. Let me say that again, to shift from blame to problem solving, to really help people understand what choices and options they have. Reframing the experience. What is the bigger picture? What are the extenuating circumstances? Maybe even the business reasons of why either the change or the breach of trust has happened. And what choices and options do people have?
We reframe when we extend compassion. The 7 steps in healing requires 2 main partners. One is courage. This is a courageous journey to step into ourselves, and it is the work of the compassionate heart. We keep our hearts open. We extend benefit of the doubt, and we take into consideration what else might be going on, not to excuse or defend or to justify, but to understand, because we are people, we are human beings, and it is not always easy to be a human being. What other extenuating circumstances might be at play that allow us to take responsibility? We may not have responsibility on what happened to cause trust to break down, but we always have responsibility for how we choose to respond. And I see people in workplaces, I see people in teams that fall into a tit for tat. You don't reply to my emails, why should I reply to your emails? You don't show up for meetings on time, why should I show up for meetings on time? You didn't invite me into that discussion, why should I invite you into that discussion? We operate at our lower selves, where trust requires us to rise above and be true to ourselves and to connect with one another. We must always take responsibility for ourselves and our own behavior. And as we do, we release the energy within us to forgive ourselves and one another, and we can let go and move on. Do we forget? We do not forget. And why would we? But there's a difference between remembering and harboring and holding the judging and the criticizing, and letting go and moving on with the lessons and the insights. Because the breach of trust can be a gift and a teacher when we allow it to be. Yesterday during our presentation, Dennis and I told you a brief story about a operations team of a global airline. This operations team is just rocking it. But there was a time when they were not. They were really, really struggling. They were responsible for a multi-million-dollar IT systems integration initiative globally, and it was tanking. They were bickering with one another. They were missing milestones. Their timelines were off. And the VP, to his credit, took a bold step, and he observed and he acknowledged that we are not on course. We are behaving in ways that are not efficient, are not effective, and quite frankly, are not acceptable. So the first thing he did was bring this team together and engage them in a process to help them see what needed to be observed and acknowledged. And the courageous step he took was to actually engage them in an assessment of trust. This gave them an objective perspective without judgment to just look at how are we showing up. They were able to see what was occurring, and they were able to, in a very non-judgmental way, express their feelings, their hurt, their disappointment, their doubt. And with the benefit of support, they were able to reframe. And in reframing, they were able to shift from finger pointing and blaming and judging and criticizing into what new ways of working together can we create. in reframing, they were able to acknowledge there's major changes in this organization. This is hard for us as leaders to lead. But if we embrace this opportunity and learn to shift the way we behave, they saw extraordinary opportunity for them to become the role models and the teachers of their own teams. They took responsibility by making a commitment to one another that we are going to support each other to become more aware of our own behavior. They made an agreement with one another. We will not talk about each other behind our back. This is no longer acceptable. They made a commitment to experiment with new ways of behaving. They practiced giving each other feedback with the intent to help each other learn and grow. They gave themselves permission to be awkward and clumsy because this was all new learning for them. And they gave themselves permission to discover new ways to care and back each other up and support one another. And from time to time say, this is hard for me. I'm learning something new. I'm trying something different here. And with the support of one another, they learn to forgive themselves because it never feels good to recognize that, gosh, we may have been behaving in ways that is not a true reflection of who we are. And they learn to let go and move on. Yesterday, we shared with you that in 9 months, this team got themselves back on track. Their employee engagement scores went up 9 points. That was double the commitment they made to their organization. 1 year later, this team reported a $1 million savings in strategic planning associated costs. And for them, their greatest source of satisfaction was the joy they were experiencing in their work and in their home. So learning how to step into and navigate and embrace the 7 steps returns us to the fullness of who we are as people and returns us to the collaborative relationships based on trust that we must have to do our best work together each and every day.
So with this example, with this model right here, we want you to actually turn to your partners and explore, are there areas, first of all, does this make sense to you, this model? And this model came actually originally from my own healing when I took a look at over 28 years ago what I went through in a very painful divorce. And I looked at the different processes that I went through and I said, well, maybe, just maybe, there might be some value for others. And then we started to apply it to individuals and then teams and then organizations and whole change processes. And of course, this is 25 years later, it's obviously been working. So we offer it to you as a tool, as a way, as a pathway through the pain into healing and renewal. What we'd like you to do is talk with one another and see what are the ways in which you can actually apply this model in your either workaday lives or maybe even your families or in your home life or in your work life. So take a few minutes right now and pick a partner and talk with them about how you can apply this model. Please begin.
Yeah. Okay, folks, let's just hear from a couple of people. We'd like to hear just a couple of comments. Where do you see yes?
So the way I really see it, being an OD professional, I think the place where I would want to implement it is probably with the CEO and his first line. And I have a reason for doing that. Because, we could do it with intact teams in the organization, but if you want to weave this into the culture of an organization and make it sustainable, so it just doesn't become about people and teams, I think it's very imperative that we start from the top.
Yes.
So,
thank you, and they certainly benefit. And another, please. We have time for one more. Yes, thank you so much.
Well, we were discussing a situation where there would be a conflict or misunderstanding between people. So one of the important aspects we discussed was transparency and transparency in communication. So we should, and the second thing is not to take things personal. In India, for example, we are quite relationship oriented. We become emotional sometimes. So I think we need to separate the personal aspect and be more transparent in our communication.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I would build is learn to use those emotions as a stepping stone, to channel them, because our emotions are what guide us and are an inner source of our wisdom. We'd like to offer a couple of things to you. We recently released a research paper based on significant research that talks about what happens when teams rebuild trust. We would love to send that to you. If that would be of value to you, please provide us with your cards. Or Krishnan is our partner here in India. Please, Krishnan, he would be delighted to provide that to you. And Dennis and I wrote this book called Rebuilding Trust in the Workplace. And we wrote this because for years people asked us to. So we are here for the remainder of the Congress. We'd love to chat more with you. Please come and be with us because we need to rebuild trust together.
Thank you so much. And remember, trust begins with you, each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you.